Good evening. My name is Robyn. I will be explaining the geeky side of the talk. I'm known as Robyn the Geek in my family because I really love the biochemistry. Originally, Mark was going to do the introduction, but for the sake of time, and it's getting late and everyone's tired, so we're going to skip the introduction, and I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of myself. My name is Robyn Kim. I am a second-generation acupuncturist and herbalist. I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't think about health and medicine. Not because I was such a bright little girl, but because my father practiced both at home and his clinic. So when I didn't help him at home with his patients, I would go to his office and help him out there. So from the age of about 15, 16, I was always surrounded by patients. After school, I'd go to his office and help him with the herbs and acupuncture, and I would bring my friends' parents over and help treat them. And so my life, the center of my universe has always been physiology, and nothing in the world is more interesting to me than human physiology, and that has always been my passion. What's interesting is that when I was about 16, my early 20s, so that would be about 20-something years ago, I'm 43, the majority of the patients that we saw were age 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right? What you would expect in a practice that saw patients. What's happened in the last 10 years, maybe 15, is that the face of medicine has changed. And it has never in the history of human history has it changed so quickly. Because now we're seeing patients in their 20s, and 30s, and in their teens, and even children with metabolic syndrome. And that's really scary. So we're going to introduce to you two products today. The second one is our joint support, but the majority of the talk is going to be focused on our Lucent MS product because that really is the bulk of what is making everyone sick. So this is our company, Lucent Premier Labs. So diabetes, it's divided into mainly two categories, type 1 and type 2. We're not going to really talk about type 1 because type 1 diabetes only makes up about 5% of the diabetes population. Diabetes type 1 is an autoimmune caused disease. It's a disease, and that's why they're very, very thin, and it's dangerous. And there's a simple cure for diabetes type 1. It's insulin. Before insulin, people died, and now they don't. So we're not really going to be too concerned about the type 1, because that's really not the type of diabetes that's afflicting most of us. Diabetes type 2, on the other hand, is the diabetes that is prevalent in about 95 or more of the population. So today when we talk about diabetes, we're relating to type 2, okay? So this is one of my favorite scientists. His name is Dr. Arthur Kornberg. He's not as well known as Watson and Crick. Anybody here know who Watson and Crick was? They are the two that discovered the double helix structure of the DNA. They're much more famous. Before Watson and Crick, there was Arthur Kornberg, and he got a Nobel Prize for his discovery of the DNA synthase enzyme. He figured out how the DNA synthesized. And he was a very, very humble scientist. And he said, half of what we know is wrong. And the purpose of science is to determine which half. That's a very humbling statement coming from a scientist, right? So that means that what we know today might not be true tomorrow. And how important is that? That means if we have questions that are not answered by the science that we agree upon today, we have to be open to thinking outside the box. We have to be open to thinking, well, this is what they say, but is that really true? Is that really scientific? What is the data that supports that? And is there any data that is quite the opposite? And I always like to think outside the box. I always like to think on the back of the envelope. What's on the other side of that? So today I'm going to present to you, they're going to call me a heretic, but today I'm going to present to you the 3 big lies of diabetes. And if you walk away from here with anything, these are the 3 things I'd really like for you to remember. Not Lucentamaz, because you'll remember that. The number 1 is that diabetes is a disease of high blood glucose, high blood sugar. So if you grab 100 people off the street, and if you said, can you tell me what diabetes is? 99.9% of those people will say, oh, diabetes is a disease of high blood sugar, right? That's only a small fraction of the equation. It is not a disease of high blood sugar. High blood sugar is just the end result. It is the symptom, and I'm going to show you why. The second lie of diabetes, and pharmacology, pharmacists actually love this part. They don't like it when I say this. The American Diabetic Association says the number 1 treatment object for diabetes is to lower blood sugar. That is their number 1 object. And they will do anything to lower your blood sugar because they think that that is the only problem. I'm going to tell you, no, that's probably not the best thing to focus on. And it won't be my data. It will be data done by people much smarter than I am. Okay, so we'll present that to you as well. And the third lie is that diabetes is a progressive disease. It has no cure. It cannot be reversed because once a diabetic is diagnosed, they say that the pancreas no longer produces insulin. They say, you know what? Once you're diagnosed with diabetes, your pancreas is not good at producing insulin anymore, and it can never go back. And I am going to argue, based on scientific data, that that's not true. And it's not my data. It's data that comes from many, many other scientists from around the world. So my goal at the end of this talk tonight is to give you the answers to these 3 questions, okay? So we all know that the diabetes is an epidemic. What is the definition of an epidemic? It means something that is causing great harm to a very large population at great speed. Those are the 3 criteria of what an epidemic is. And diabetes fits every one of those 3 criteria. And all we have to do is go to a gathering and just look around, right? So globally, 1 in 11 adults already has diabetes. And the scary thing is 1 in 2 adults that have it, they don't even know that they have it. They're sick, but they don't know. And if you look at the amount of money we spend on healthcare, all the money that is spent on healthcare, if you take 12% of that in the entire world, that is used in managing, not even treating, just managing diabetes and its diabetes complications. That's a lot of money, right? And we have countries that are going bankrupt, like the US. The US will be, the healthcare system will be bankrupt in about 15 years if it doesn't reverse. And other countries are not far behind either. What is even scarier, this is the International Diabetes Federation. What's actually scarier is it's that by 2035, the diabetes cases are expected to jump 55%. In a population, right now we have a global population of 7.5 billion people, and you increase that by 55% on the prevalence. That's a lot of people. And the Western Pacific and Southeast Asia, where we are in the Philippines, that prevalence is increasing very, very quickly. So this is Philippines data right here. The Philippines is considered one of the world's hotspots of diabetes emergence. It's a very small country, but it's ranked in the top 15 for diabetes prevalence, right? 4 million are diagnosed, and 1.7 million remain undiagnosed. And that's the 2014 data. It's the 2016 data will come out, it's probably higher than that. And they are estimating that pretty soon over 7 million Filipinos will have diabetes. And that's a very, very, yeah, that's pretty. You go to a room full of 10 people, you know, 2 of them will have it, and probably a few more have it and they don't even know it. Okay. This is a very interesting chart here. I brought it because it sort of fits in with what we're going to talk about later, that diabetes is not just about the blood sugar. And causes of mortality from the Philippine database. Number 9, diabetes. That's the number 9th killer or cause of mortality in the Philippines. But if you look over here, number 1 and number 2, the number 1 cause is diseases of the heart, cardiovascular disease. And number 2 is diseases of the vascular system. That's the diseases of your blood vessels. Okay, so those 2 are the top causes of death in the Philippines. I'm going to show you later that diabetes and heart disease and vascular disease, they're one and of the same thing. It's the same disease, just in a different location. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to look at data that supports that. So if you actually take the number of diabetics, pre-diabetics, diabetics that are diabetic and not diagnosed, and if you also look at the people that die of heart disease and vascular disease, you do the math, that's a lot of people, right? That's pretty scary. So what is diagnosis? What is diabetes? Diabetes, technically, is when is above 125 degrees fasting. Fasting means without eating. So those of you that are diabetic, you take your blood sugar in the morning, right? That's fasting glucose. Normal is when it's less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. You're pre-diabetic when it's between about 100 and 125. They call that pre-diabetes. I call that on the way to diabetes, but they call it pre-diabetes. And if you're over 125, you are considered diabetic. What's really interesting is that that's a very small number. 25 milligrams per deciliter. That's not even grams, that's milligrams. That's a milligram is 1,000th of a gram. Okay? So that small range of 25 milligrams will determine whether you are sick or healthy. That's a very, very small number. And why is that important? It's important. This is your hemoglobin. The other test that's used as criteria, besides the fasting glucose, is called the hemoglobin A1C. Hemoglobin is a protein in your blood cell that causes it to be red, because inside the center of that molecule, there's an iron atom there, and that's what gives it that red color. And hemoglobin carries the oxygen in the blood. And you'll see it, you'll see it right over here. That's hemoglobin, okay? That's a red blood cell. A glycated hemoglobin is when glucose sticks to the hemoglobin. Glycated means when it sticks onto something, when a sugar molecule sticks onto your food. And this is the picture of a hemoglobin with the blue, which is the glucose stuck to it. Sugar is sticky. It sticks to everything. How many people have liked Korean barbecue here? And chicken teriyaki, right? What happens if you leave it on the grill too long? It burns, right? But if you take the same steak and don't put the sugar marinade on it, you can keep it on the grill and it won't burn as quickly. And what's doing that? The sugar is causing the glycation of the proteins. And in your blood, the glucose, or excess glucose, does exactly the same thing, and that's why we measure that in the blood. So those are the 2 tests that we measure for, which is a standard. The fasting glucose and the HbA1c. So that's the range. Normal is about 5.7 to 6.4. 6.5 or above, you're diabetic. I'm going to present to you some data that shows you that the most dangerous stage of diabetes is actually right over here in that pre-diabetes stage. And I'm going to present to you data that suggests why that is so dangerous. Okay. So here's a question for you, a little quiz. How many teaspoons of sugar in the form of glucose do you think is in your entire body? 1, 2, 3 teaspoons or 7 teaspoons? You can't answer that because I told you that yesterday, right? Okay, who says 1 teaspoon? Who says 2? Raise your hand. 3, 7. No answers? Yeah. So 7? Okay. All right. Let's see if you're right. Okay. So if you do the math, the human body has about 5 liters of blood. And if normal glucose is 100 milligrams per deciliter, and 1 teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams, if you do the math, the whole 5 liters of blood has only about a teaspoon of sugar dissolved into it. So you take those 2-liter bottles, you take 5, make it into 5, and if you dissolve 1 teaspoon, that's how much sugar you have in your entire body. And that's what your body likes. Your body functions well when it's at the 1 teaspoon mark. Surprising, huh? Almost everybody gets this one wrong, so don't feel bad. Okay. So why is it important? Because the difference between 1 teaspoon and 1/4 of a teaspoon either makes you healthy or diabetic, 1/4 of a teaspoon. And what that tells us is that there is a natural system in the body that's inherently there, you were born that way, that controls your glucose very, very intricately. It is on autopilot. It works 24/7, whether you're working or you're sleeping. It is on autopilot. The amount of sugar that's in your blood is not regulated by what you eat today. It is regulated by a finely orchestrated set of hormones that monitor your blood sugar several million times per day in real time. And that is called, we're going to learn a new word today, it's called glucose homeostasis. Balancing the sugar in the body. And that is the key. Our product, Metabolic Support, helps restore glucose homeostasis in the body. It does not use products that lower your blood sugar. Why? Because we have a system that's in place that is so much better. Why mess with that? All we have to do is make this system work. The liver and the pancreas, the brain's not up here, but it's going to be up here. The liver and the pancreas and the brain are the 3 major organs that will regulate your blood sugar. There's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and the liver to a husband and wife. And the brain kind of like the little master switch in between. These 3 organs regulate your blood sugar to maintain that 100. And make sure it doesn't go up to the 1 1/4 teaspoon. Okay. And you notice the arrows? The arrows don't go only in one direction. It's circular. They're all connected. One defect affects another, and that's why it's called a cycle, the metabolic cycle. Okay. So we have other hormones, but there are 2 main hormones that control blood sugar. We all know what insulin is, right? Everybody knows about insulin. A 3-year-old knows what insulin is. But most people don't know that there is a yang to the yin. And that's a hormone called glucagon. Okay? Insulin and glucagon have exactly the opposite effects. Insulin lowers your blood sugar. Glucagon raises your blood sugar. And they work together by balancing each other, like a seesaw, to maintain, what was that word? Glucose homeostasis. Both insulin and glucagon are both stimulated by the pancreas. And everybody concerned about insulin, but nobody really cares about glucagon. Why? I don't know why. But glucagon is very, very important. Glucagon is what drives hypoglycemia. Their blood sugars go too low. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Glucagon actually raises your blood sugar. So because it's unopposed, you have this yo-yo effect. So this, you see how this is finely balanced here. In diabetics, it goes up and down too much. Okay. So what is diabetes? Diabetes is not a disease of high blood sugar, right? We already said that. It's a symptom. Diabetes is when you develop insulin resistance. It's when your cells, which are supposed to respond to insulin properly, start to develop resistance, and the glucose cannot get into the cell. It's just floating around, and that's why your blood sugar goes up. Now, look how much glucose is in here. Glucose is the energy of life, right? Well, what's happening to the cell when it doesn't get glucose? It is literally starving. And that's why diabetes is a disease where the person is actually starving from inside out. They're swimming in glucose and they can't use it. Okay. So I compare diabetes to ATM machine here, okay? It's like having a lot of money in the bank and you stick your card in there and it says, sorry, PIN number is wrong. Uh-oh. You can't get your money, right? And that's because on the outside of your cells, there are things called insulin receptors. They're sort of like the guard at the door. And the insulin comes over here, knocks on it and says, hey, let the glucose in. And because the receptors have developed resistance, they're not working very well. They say, no, 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 no. We're not going to let you in. And the glucose is not able to get into the cell. And that's what insulin resistance is. So in diabetics, it's not that you don't have enough insulin. You have plenty of insulin. Actually, you have too much insulin. It's just that it's not working. Like you have a lot of money in the bank, and because the code is wrong, you can't withdraw the money out. So what causes insulin resistance then? That's the natural question, right? Well, if diabetes is insulin resistance, what's causing the insulin resistance? In the body, whenever a hormone is elevated too high and it's too constant, the body will downregulate or become insensitive to that hormone as a protection. So the illustration that I like to use frequently is when you walk into a fragrance shop or when you walk into the cosmetics department of Macy's or Nordstrom and you want to buy some perfume and you walk in and what's the first thing you smell? Perfume, right? You get hit by the perfume. And you want to buy a perfume and you know they keep spraying it on your face and your hands and you keep smelling it and what happens? You can't tell the difference anymore, right? What have you developed? Resistance, right? You have developed resistance to the perfume. So how do you regain the sensitivity? What do? You have to walk out the store, right? You have to walk out of the store, get some fresh air, and then when you come back in, you are sensitive again to the perfume, right? That is the same thing as restoring sensitivity. Now, what if you're the person working behind the counter and you're there all day long? That person cannot smell the perfume because they have developed resistance, right? So, in the body becomes insulin resistant due to something called hyperinsulinemia. It's a fancy word, but I'm going to break it down for you, for those that don't know technical language. Hyper means too much or very high. Insulin, and anything that ends in emia means in the blood. It simply means you have too much insulin in your blood for too long, okay? So what causes insulin resistance is hyperinsulinemia. Too much insulin for too long at a constant rate is causing insulin resistance. Just like the person that's working behind the fragrance counter, they're working there all day long, they have developed resistance. But if you go in and out, you're gonna still be sensitive, right? And that's how hyperinsulinemia causes insulin resistance. It's too high all the time, and the body does not like